was activated, not to call Moscow, not to call Beijing, but to connect to Ouagadougou. The supreme leader of Iran asked to speak with Ibrahim Traoré. The world was still struggling to process what had happened. Within the first hour, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared on national television and declared, "Iran's nuclear ambitions will not go unchecked. We have taken action." The United States remained silent, but its warships in the Persian Gulf repositioned within striking distance. Oil prices surged. Across Iraq and Syria, Iranian-aligned militias retaliated by shelling American bases. It had begun a regional inferno. But inside Iran's corridors of power, it wasn't just the missile strikes that worried them. A series of cyber attacks had shut down radar, disrupted communication, and blinded entire sectors of Iran's defense systems. Tehran suspected coordination, a wider web of enemies. And in that critical moment, with their traditional allies hesitant, Iran turned its gaze south. A gamble, a call, to a continent often ignored, but now holding unexpected leverage, to a man who had defied the West and survived. The call was traced through a secure military line, bouncing off 3 encrypted satellites before reaching West Africa. In the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was in a high-level briefing with his generals. Reports were already coming in: strange drone activity near the northern borders, a sudden surge of online disinformation targeting his government. Then came the knock. A senior aide entered the room holding a secure red handset. No words were needed. The weight on the aide's face said it all. Traoré took the phone without hesitation. The room went still. On the other side, a voice, calm, deep, deliberate. "President Traoré," said the supreme leader, "Iran stands on the edge. They want us to fall, because if we do, Africa is next." A long silence followed, not from fear, but from calculation. Every word that would follow had consequences. There was a reason Iran didn't call China or Russia. Those powers would offer caution, not commitment. But in Traoré, they saw something different. Tehran's intelligence services had been tracking a wider pattern. Mossad agents were reportedly operating in the Sahel, masked as humanitarian workers. French surveillance drones had been detected over Niger, even after Paris was expelled. And Burkina Faso had refused to be part of Western security architecture. That independence made Traoré dangerous and valuable. Iran viewed the conflict not just as a battle for survival, but a test of global alliances. If Africa remained neutral, Israel and its Western allies would dominate the narrative. But if even one African leader stood up, especially one with growing regional influence, it would send a message. Iran believed the future of this war would not be decided in Tel Aviv or Washington. It might begin in Ouagadougou. The voice on the line did not beg, nor did it manipulate. It was the voice of a leader under siege, speaking to another who had survived siege after siege. "President," Khamenei said, "this is not a request for weapons. It's a request for solidarity. They want to isolate us. But if Africa stands beside us, we are not isolated. We are awakened." Traoré stood silently, eyes fixed forward. Then slowly he responded. "You speak of shared struggle, but where was Iran when the Sahel bled under colonial knives?" The line was silent. "Still," Traoré continued, "today is not about yesterday. It is about power. And today you call because you know Africa's voice can no longer be ignored." He didn't commit. He didn't refuse. He reframed the conversation. "If we are to stand with you, it must be public. No backdoor understandings. The world must see Iran recognize Africa as an equal." The line remained quiet, but Khamenei replied with one sentence, "Then let the world see." What followed was not broadcasted, but intelligence sources confirmed its magnitude. Within the hour, Iranian officials transferred encrypted files directly to Burkina Faso's defense ministry. The contents were stunning. A French-operated drone base previously denied by Paris had been discovered inside Niger. Israeli cyber signatures were found in malware used against West African government servers. There were even intercepts of private NATO conversations mentioning containment strategies for Sahelian states. Traoré's security chiefs were in disbelief. The war wasn't just in the Middle East. It had already crossed into Africa, silently. His decision was swift. All Western military flights over Burkina Faso were immediately banned. Emergency messages were sent to Mali and Niger. A summit was called. The agenda: regional survival. But one idea had already been born: a new alliance, not of the East, not of the West, but of those left out of both. The reaction from African nations was mixed. Mali, already aligned with Burkina Faso, offered support. Guinea followed suit. But others hesitated, fearing economic retaliation or diplomatic backlash. Western media exploded. Headlines screamed, "Burkina Faso aligns with Iran." Analysts debated whether this was a declaration of war or a symbolic gesture. The U.S. State Department issued a vague warning about regional destabilization. At the United Nations, African diplomats were cornered with questions. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Conakry, something else was happening. Crowds began chanting Traoré's name. Posters showed his face next to phrases like, "We will not kneel," and "Africa will decide." The West had long underestimated the symbolic power of standing alone. Now it feared the strength of standing together. Inside his compound, Traoré convened another closed meeting. But this time it wasn't just generals and ministers. Religious leaders, student representatives, and traditional chiefs were invited. He wanted unity, not just orders. "We have been offered a voice in a war that is not ours," he said. "But make no mistake, if we remain silent, they will come for us next. Not with bombs, but with blockades, lies, and puppets." One elder stood and replied, "Then speak, son, and let the world hear the voice they tried to silence." That night, Traoré released a televised address, not just to his people, but to the world. Burkina Faso does not choose war, but we choose justice. And when the oppressed call, we answer, not as tools, but as equals. Within hours, Iran's national broadcaster aired the clip. Across the Middle East, the image of an African president standing firm became a viral symbol. Back in Israel, Netanyahu responded swiftly. In a press briefing, he dismissed Traoré's remarks as dangerous ignorance, warning that those who side with our enemies will face consequences. But the message didn't have the weight it once did. The world was shifting. Traoré didn't just support Iran, he forced Iran to respect Africa in return. In doing so, he carved a third path, a rejection of forced allegiances and scripted diplomacy. And while the missiles still flew over Tehran and the drones still circled over the Red Sea, one quiet signal had been sent. The balance of power no longer belonged to old empires alone. It now included voices long ignored and newly awakened. What began as a military strike had transformed into a global confrontation of narratives. Was this about nuclear weapons or about sovereignty? Was Iran the villain or the last defiant state against Western order? And where did Africa stand? For decades, the continent had been courted only for resources or proxy interests. But today, in the middle of global war, it had become a diplomatic pivot. China and Russia remained measured. They didn't openly endorse Traoré's move, but praised his sovereign stand. Western think tanks scrambled to issue reports warning of Africa's dangerous alignment, but they missed the real story. Africa wasn't aligning with Iran. It was aligning with itself, and Traoré was its voice. By the following week, Iran's retaliation had begun, limited but fierce. U.S. bases in Syria were hit. Israeli embassies in multiple countries went into lockdown. A cyber attack paralyzed port operations in Haifa. But the war's most unexpected front was now diplomatic. In the African Union, delegates began quietly discussing the possibility of a non-aligned counterweight bloc. Old alliances were questioned. Presidents who had remained neutral felt growing pressure from their own people to speak. In Dakar, students marched holding signs saying, "Burkina stood up, what about us?" In Johannesburg, debates on whether Africa should continue voting with the West at the UN grew louder. A political earthquake had been triggered, not by force, but by a phone call. Weeks later, with no formal treaty and no exchange of weapons, the world had already changed. Iran stood bruised but not broken. Israel had proven its reach, but not its deterrence. The US hesitated, unwilling to commit full-scale involvement. And Africa, long spoken over, was finally speaking for itself.